Warm greetings. Art is not merely an object of visual pleasure, it is a fundamental mode through which human beings organize perception, emotion, and meaning. To understand art, therefore, is to understand something essential about human consciousness itself. In this context, the meaning of art by Herbert Read occupies a central place in modern aesthetic thought. Written in the early 20th century, this work offers a clear yet profound inquiry into what art truly is, how it functions, and why it matters across cultures and historical periods. Rather than limiting art to beauty or imitation, Herbert Read approaches it as an intuitive and psychological process, one that brings together form, pattern, and expression into a unified aesthetic experience. In this video, we will explore Read's key ideas on art, beauty, form, intuition, and abstraction, and examine how his insights challenge conventional assumptions about artistic value. This introduction sets the foundation for understanding art not as a decorative luxury, but as a disciplined, human response to the world, an expression shaped by sensibility, structure, and creative vision. Herbert Read was an influential English critic, poet, and philosopher of art whose writings shaped modern aesthetics, art education, and museum culture in Britain and beyond. A prominent figure in the early 20th century modernist movement, Read advocated for the intrinsic value of aesthetic experience and championed the intimate connection between artistic creation and human psychological development. His thought is marked by a synthesis of romantic individualism, anarchist political leanings, and an advanced understanding of modern art movements emerging in Europe. Educated at the University of Leeds, Read's early career was shaped by his experience in the First World War, which deepened his interest in psychological and expressive dimensions of human creativity. Over the decades he wrote widely on poetry, painting, sculpture, design, and education. His works include Education Through Art in 1943, Art Now in 1933, Art and Society in 1936, and The Grassroots of Art in 1947. He was knighted in 1953 for services to literature. Read remained one of the earliest British defenders of abstract art, believing that modern art forms demonstrated the essential nature of creativity more directly than representational traditions. His eclectic intellectual influences, ranging from Schopenhauer and Croce to Jung and modern psychology, inform his characteristic blending of philosophical aesthetics with experiential insight. Herbert Read's The Meaning of Art. First published in 1931 and later issued in the Penguin edition in 1949, reprinted multiple times, The Meaning of Art is one of Read's most accessible yet intellectually rich explorations of aesthetic principles. The work is structured around a simple but profound aim, to clarify the nature of art by examining its fundamental elements, psychological foundations, and historical manifestations. It serves as both an introduction to the philosophy of art and a compact guide to the evolution of visual culture. Definition of art. While the term art is typically associated with the visual or plastic arts, it properly encompasses literature and music as well. Read argues that all arts aspire to the condition of music, a concept derived from Schopenhauer, because music is pure form, free from utilitarian purpose or the constraints of a communication medium like language. The simplest definition common to all artists is the desire to please. Therefore, art is defined fundamentally as an attempt to create pleasing forms. The sense of beauty is the specific human instinct that is satisfied when we perceive a unity or harmony of formal relations among our sense perceptions. Humans have an innate biological response to the surface, shape, and mass of objects. When these physical properties are arranged effectively, they produce a pleasurable sensation, beauty. When they lack arrangement, they produce indifference or the discomfort known as ugliness. Definition of beauty. While definitions vary, the only essential definition is physical. Beauty is a unity of formal relations among our sense perceptions. This definition serves as the foundation for an inclusive theory of art, although Read cautions that the concept of beauty is highly relative and fluctuates across history. The classical ideal. The specific type of beauty most people recognize is the classical ideal. Originating in ancient Greece and inherited by the Renaissance, this ideal is anthropomorphic. It centers on the idealization of man and nature, emphasizing nobility, serenity, and perfect proportion. Because Western culture inherited this tradition, we often mistakenly assume this specific ideal is the only definition of beauty. Distinction between art and beauty. A major obstacle in art appreciation is the confusion between art and beauty. It is a false assumption that all art must be beautiful or that ugliness is the negation of art. Historically and sociologically, art is not necessarily beautiful, it is often a thing of no beauty by standard definitions. Beauty is a specific historical concept rooted in the classical Greek ideal, which exalted perfect humanity and nature, e.g. the Apollo Belvedere. However, a savage idol or a Byzantine monument may be unbeautiful by Greek standards yet remain a legitimate and powerful work of art. Art as intuition. To avoid the pitfalls of the word beauty, Read adopts Benedetto Croce's definition of art as intuition. A complete aesthetic experience involves 3 stages. Perception, sensing material qualities, colors, sounds. Arrangement, organizing these into pleasing patterns, the domain of aesthetics. Expression, making this arrangement correspond to a pre-existing emotion or feeling. Art is expression, but it must be shaped by form. Expression without form is merely incoherent emotion, not art. Art not uniform. Art does not express a single ideal but rather any ideal the artist can realize in plastic form. The classical ideal is just one among many. Byzantine, abstract, divine, intellectual, and anti-vital. Primitive, an expression of fear or propitiation. Oriental, abstract, metaphysical, and non-human. Attempting to force the label of beauty onto a primitive mask or a Byzantine icon causes verbal distortion. These are works of art, but they serve different psychological purposes than Greek sculpture. Art and aesthetics. There is a functional distinction between art and aesthetics. Aesthetics is the science of perception, concerned with the first 2 stages of the artistic process, perceiving qualities and arranging them into pleasing patterns. Art involves the 3rd stage, the communication of feeling or emotion. Confusion arises when the feeling communicated, the purpose of art, is mixed up with the feeling of the forms themselves, beauty, aesthetics. Form and expression. Form corresponds to the static, permanent aesthetic sensibility of mankind. It is intuitive and can be described as emotion-directed and defined. Expression is variable, it is the interpretation of those forms based on immediate feelings. Therefore, primitive art is not lower than Greek art, it possesses a fine instinct for form but expresses the values of a different civilization. The golden section. Since antiquity, humans have sought a mathematical law for art. The most famous is the golden section, a ratio obtained by cutting a line so the shorter part is to the longer as the longer is to the whole, roughly 5/8. This geometric proportion appears in nature, the pyramids, Gothic cathedrals, and the construction of violins, representing a right proportion that appeals to the eye. Limitations of geometrical harmony. While geometry helps secure harmony, a work of art cannot be explained mechanistically. Perfect adherence to geometric regularity, as seen in some Greek vases, can result in art that feels cold and lifeless. True beauty often relies on the artist's instinct to make subtle departures from exact regular measure, much like variations in poetic meter prevent monotony. Distortion. Distortion is a deliberate disregard for natural proportions or geometric harmony. It is found in all art, including the classical, where features were regularized for the ideal. Distortion is purposive, dictated by the will to form, the desire to create a unified pattern. Symbolism, the need to represent spiritual or superior concepts, e.g. Byzantine figures symbolizing majesty rather than realistic childhood. Pattern. The instinct for pattern is basic and universal. In art, pattern means arranging visual elements to create unity rather than to copy reality. Artists use repetition, rhythm, and curved forms to give structure to a work. Although all art contains patterns, pattern alone is not art. Mechanical designs, such as machine-made carpets, lack artistic value because they are not shaped by human sensibility. A true work of art must express the artist's personal vision. Herbert Read defines art as pattern informed by sensibility, emphasizing that pattern must be guided by feeling and perception. Sensibility gives life to form. When an artist focuses too much on moral preaching or abstract ideas detached from sensory experience, the artwork loses its purity. Types of pattern. Pattern is the arrangement of lines and colors within a frame. It appears in different forms. 1. Simple repetition, repeated shapes or colors. 2. Symmetry, exact balance or mirror-like arrangement. 3. Distributed balance, elements balance around an imagined center without strict symmetry. When pattern is shaped by sensibility, it achieves both unity and expression, becoming genuine art rather than mere decoration. Form is the shape or arrangement of parts, the visible aspect of the art. It does not imply fixed symmetry. Read uses the analogy of an athlete in good form. It implies efficiency, good carriage, and the absence of anything superfluous. The necessity of form. Aesthetics apply even to simple elements like color because placing two colors side by side creates a formal relationship. All art is the development of these formal relations. Where there is form, there can be empathy. What happens when we look at a picture? The aesthetic reaction is physical and instantaneous. Before any intellectual analysis occurs, a viewer with an open mind receives a shock of joy, which may manifest physically as a dilation of the eyes or a sharp intake of breath. The viewer is held by the object immediately. The theory of Einfühlung, empathy, explains this instantaneous reaction. It means feeling into the work of art, as opposed to feeling with or sympathy. When we look at a masterpiece, such as a hokusai print of a wave, we project our own physical sensations into the form. We feel the tension of the crest and the upwelling movement of the water as if we were the wave. Sentimentality. Art differs fundamentally from sentimentality. Sentimentality loosens and relaxes the emotions, releasing. Art braces and heightens the emotions. Art is the economy of feeling. It cultivates and structures emotion rather than simply discharging it. Psychological values. A portrait operates on 3 levels. 1. Psychological, faithful portrayal of individual character, scientific truth. 2. Aesthetic, the arrangement of formal relations, treating the face as a still life. 3. Philosophical, the greatest portraits go beyond the individual to reveal universal implications, seeing the one in the many, e.g. Rembrandt or Shakespeare. Content. Distinct from form is content, the meaning, utility, or narrative depicted. For example, a Gothic church is also a liturgical hall. A painting may depict a historical scene. Art without content, pottery. Pottery is considered the simplest yet most difficult art because it is the most abstract. It is free from imitative intention, it doesn't try to look like nature. A Greek vase represents static harmony, crystalline. A Chinese vase represents dynamic harmony, like a living flower. Pottery is a sure touchstone for judging a nation's aesthetic sensibility. Abstract art. Read posits that all art is primarily abstract because the aesthetic experience is a response to isolated harmonies, form, color, line, rather than the subject matter. Art is an escape from chaos, it is movement ordained in numbers and mass confined in measure. Humanistic art, the portrait. In contrast to abstract art, humanistic art, like that of the Renaissance, makes man the measure of all things. The portrait is a tribute to human vitality and character. Its rise historically corresponds with the rise of the novel. The elements of a work of art. A work of art can be analyzed by isolating its physical elements, generally in this order of priority. Line. The most fundamental element. It defines outlines but also expresses movement, rhythm, and suggests mass, pictorial shorthand. In great art, the line has an autonomous, dancing quality. Tone. The relation of light to shadow and substance. It evolved from simple shading, to show solidity, to a dramatic tool. Rembrandt used tone not just for realism but to create an aesthetic pattern of light and shade, counterpoint. Color. Read identifies 3 modes. 1. Heraldic, symbolic, for example, blue for the Virgin Mary. 2. Harmonic, regulated by tone and restricted scales. 3. Pure, used for its own sake or to define form through intensity, for example, Matisse, Cézanne. Form. In painting, form is divided into 1. Architectural, using stable, pyramid, or dynamic, baroque spiral, structural bases. 2. Symbolic, abstract shapes that appeal to the subconscious and deep emotional memory. Unity. In a perfect work of art, all the elements, line, color, form, cohere to create a unity that is greater than the sum of its parts. This unity is achieved through the dominating personality of the artist and appeals directly to intuitive apprehension rather than conscious analysis. Structural motives. Artists organize their compositions using structural motives, simple schemes like the pyramid or the spiral. These motives often reflect the rhythm of their historical period. For instance, the spiral is the typical dynamic rhythm of the Baroque era, for example, Rubens. The Meaning of Art by Herbert Read invites us to reconsider art beyond narrow definitions of beauty, imitation, or subject matter. Read compels us to recognize art as an intuitive synthesis of form, pattern, and expression, an organized response to human experience shaped by sensibility and psychological depth. By distinguishing art from mere decoration, sentimentality, or moral instruction, Read restores its true function as a disciplined yet profoundly human activity. His insights remind us that art does not mirror reality passively, rather, it transforms perception into meaningful structure. Whether classical or primitive, representational or abstract, art remains a vital means through which humanity seeks order, harmony, and emotional clarity. Thus, the meaning of art continues to hold relevance not only as a work of aesthetic theory but as a guide for learning how to see, feel, and understand art in its fullest sense.